Hey, Paul.
Hey, Brad. Sorry, that seemed even worse than the first one, but keep it. That's the natural way that we greet each other whenever we
This is
see each
go.
other, with that
We shout
really
each other.
awkward, yeah, shouting each other's names.
So let's dig into it. What has you waking up excited these days?
Retirement? Does that count? No, no. Actually, I'm more excited now than I have been for a very long time. I'm one of those people. I started in the web in 1994, right? So just as it was all taking off, and I loved the chaos of it, the wild west of it. And then Jeffrey Zeldman came along, and we all had to learn CSS. Oh, I loved that excitement, new thing, new stuff going on. And then Web 2 came along, and then Flash disappeared, and then there was responsive design with Ethan Marcotte, and then the web got dull. It was so predictable. It was we all know what we've got to do, and it's all very sensible and grown up. And then AI came along, and now we've got chaos again. And I'm somebody that thrives off of the chaos. So at the moment, I'm loving it because all of the old rules no longer apply. We've got to work out new ways of working, new ways of doing things. And I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff. The way I describe it is, don't give me a roadmap to get me from A to B, right? But give me surfing, where you have to follow the waves and you have to, by the way, I've never surfed a day in my life and I would be terrible at it. But that idea that you can't just go in a straight pre-planned line, but you have to go with the flow. And I love it when it's like that. So yeah, I'm alive at the moment. Unlike most people that seem to be terrified. And I feel almost guilty for being excited because so many people are scared, which I understand. I get that too.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot there. One, your vernacular still has that 1994 surfing the web.
I can. Yes. So I wake up every morning going and I log into the internet highway using my dial-up modem. Yeah, I'm stuck in the past, is what you're saying, Brad.
Yeah.
I'm not at all insulted by that.
I think what's very, very fascinating, which gets to the heart of what this show is about, is you've been on the many waves of the web for a long time. And despite going through things, finding there's been times of stability, there's been times of maturity, there's these weird moments, these chaotic moments as you're describing. And to meet that with enthusiasm and excitement sounds like a real quality that you've learned about yourself over the decades.
And it's got easier as well, because there's one degree where you think you have to be a certain type of person. And I am a certain type of person. I'm a person that loves a bit of chaos and a bit of change. But it's also, you learn over the decades, because it's now over 3 decades of working in the web. You learn over that period of time that it all works out in the end. That you fret and you worry about these things. When I've sat down and read Jeffrey Zeldman's book on designing with web standards, it was like, oh shit, I have to relearn everything I know about how websites are created. And, that was terrifying. That was really worrying. But if I go back even further, the one that I remember the most, and I think the one that is most relevant today, was when I was at university. Then this was before the web. Oh God, I am so old. I studied graphic design at university. And while I was studying, this is going to just make me sound even older. When I was studying graphic design, this thing called desktop publishing came along, right? And suddenly everybody was going, well, we don't need graphic designers anymore. Everybody can design their own posters and their own flyers and all of this kind of stuff. We're not going to need you anymore. And we were all going, oh no, we're all going to be out of a job. It's the end of the world. It's terrible. And sure enough, there was a couple of years where it was really hard to find work because all of that work was being done by, people themselves in organizations. And then suddenly people began to wake up and go, oh, why are all our posters look terrible? Why are we using Comic Sans for everything? And I need a grown up. I need a designer
Yeah.
to do this. And actually, that tool that I thought was to democratize or enable us all to do it actually really was a tool for the expert to use and do more with. And I know we're going to come over onto democratization. I'm actually a believer in that. But I think we are at the same moment where everybody's going, oh, we don't need specialists anymore. We don't need UX teams. We don't need developers. We can get AI to do all of this magic for us. Yeah, okay. Give it 10 minutes and you'll be all right. I've seen this again with the .com boom and bust. I saw it again with, all kinds of different things. This is just the way it rolls. And I think when you've been through that loop enough, you begin to chill out a little bit and know it'll work itself out.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, but it kind of takes experiencing those reps and experiencing, here's this new thing, the pendulum swings hard, and then it ultimately kind of comes back to maybe more of a reasonable sort of center where it's just like people feel like they need to try it to take it to the extreme, and then ultimately kind of walk it back to a place. And there's a lot of dust that gets kicked up in the process, and a lot of, I think you're right in pointing out the feelings, but at this, because everybody is feeling that to some degree right now. So I think that your arc is actually really welcoming to hear that many decades later. It's like, yep, this happens, and it happens again, and it happens again, and we'll be okay.
I'm not trivializing the position that people find themselves in at all. My daughter at the moment is at York University studying computer science, and she's supposed to be getting a year's placement, right? Not a hope. There's nothing out there for a junior, developer at the moment. Nobody's taking anybody on because we can use AI to do that. And you will go through painful times. I remember when the .com bubble went and I was made redundant, but that was when I set up an agency that was the best thing I ever did. There are always opportunities. The key is to keep your eye open for those opportunities and to grasp them when they come. And I think to grasp a new opportunity, you need to have empty hands. And that kind of means letting go of what went before. And I think the problem comes is where you're not willing to let go of what you've got to grasp what could be. Sorry, that sounded really trite when I said that out loud.
No,
but you know what I mean?
No. I think that there's something really powerful in that, and because it almost sounds like you've gotten very skilled at that process of letting go, of having to learn something, master something, only to kind of not fully abandon it, I'm sure, but to have to confront the fact that things are different now, and I need to sort of start anew. It's almost like it's like shedding layers or something.
Yeah, you could tell that if you look at my order of my books, right? First book, Website Owner's Manual, right? This is back in the kind of early 2000s where you had webmasters that used to do everything, right? Obviously, I had to let go of that. Then next book was Digital Adaptation, where we were all digitally transforming. Do you remember when we all did that for 5 minutes? And then that's become, I mean, the idea of digitally transforming now, I mean, it's ridiculous. If your organization hasn't got digital at the heart of everything it's doing at this point, then you're probably a greengrocer, or something like that. And then I did User Experience Revolution, where I was writing about establishing user-centric cultures in the organization. To be fair, that one kind of is still an ongoing issue. But then there's, after that was one about conversion rate optimization. So you're kind of moving on all of the time because the conversation moves on,
Mm-hmm. What do you have? Because I've been reading your website for as long as I've been doing my thing, and I have.
This is the point. This is the point, everybody listening to this, where Brad is going to say, "I started listening to your podcast when I was at high school," or something like that, just to make me feel really old.
No, I know. I distinctly remember. I have a very specific version of your website design in my head right now.
Did it have cows on?
I think so, but I mostly remember the typography of it. It's just like the lowercase, kind of like retro pump demi bold something or other.
Yes.
Like it was just like a cool, thick, like lowercase thing. And I just remember being like, this is awesome. Like this is, and at the time I was just kind of feeling around for like, who is working in this world, like just trying to get my hands on everything. And so yeah, so it's really wild that you've been at it for so long and have this longevity to sharing, publishing, going on, riding these waves.
Well, that's what it comes down to. See, that's the key. That last sentence you just said there. I figure things out via sharing. Right? What is it? They say you don't really understand a subject unless you can teach it or something.
Yeah.
And for me, that really is how it is. And I often start teaching on a subject before I know what I think about it.
Yep.
which sounds so wrong. You know, it sounds terrible. And you do get screwed over doing that. I remember teaching about accessibility back in, I don't know, must have been the early noughties or something around there. I said a load of stuff that was complete rubbish, right? I got it entirely wrong. And that was embarrassing. But it's how I learn, because I got a response back. You have to be quite thick-skinned sometimes because the response is fairly merciless. But that's how I learned through that. And I've always had that mentality of let's share and let's learn together. I know that the vast majority of people don't do that. I think there's a lot of people that if they do share, they're doing it really from content marketing point of view, you know. And I do it for that. I'm not going to claim I don't do it for that as well. But it is primarily a learning mechanism for myself to help me articulate what it is I'm thinking about, where I'm going. And that often leads to a response, and that further refines my thinking and the direction that I'm going with stuff. So, I mean, yes. You must be the same, surely, I imagine.
Yeah, I think that more people need to hear this, because I think that things have evolved to speak to the content marketing side of things.
Yeah.
And just like content creation, just I think like in general, that stuff just makes me wince, even though like you, I'm also out there. I've got things to sell and, a family to feed and whatever. But at the same time, I think that you're touching on the basis of what makes this medium so powerful is that we're all able to get out there. Here's my coffee.
Yeah.
My coffee value. Yeah. Let's share what we know, right? World Wide Web. But also let's share what we don't know. And I think that there's a real art to what you're describing. It's like, going out saying, here's all this stuff about accessibility, and to speak like you know what it is, even if you're just kind of figuring it out. There's an art form to basically going, here's this area I find intellectually interesting, or something that appears to have some promise, or here's what I'm learning, to be able to sort of simultaneously share what you've learned to date, but also not being so bold to say like, this is and that's right. Like the current state of like LinkedIn, for instance, that there's no room for any of that kind of humility in saying like, hey, I don't have this figured out, but I think that this is really cool and this is really interesting.
And that is a learnt skill, because if I go back to that example with accessibility, I did go in with that I know everything mentality, and I fell flat on my face. And I kind of learned from constant levels of embarrassment over the years to maybe tone it down a bit, you know. And I think that's part of growing older anyway, is realizing that you're not God's gift to the world, and you don't have all of the answers. But what's interesting, I find, about LinkedIn is that people are very savvy, and they can smell content marketing BS a mile off. And actually, especially now when you can use AI to produce all this shit, the more sincere, the more genuine, the more open you are, the more that people respond to that kind of stuff. And I run an agency academy, so agency owners and freelancers, and most of them go, oh, I could never share like you share, Paul, because I'm not a fan of that kind of content marketing. It makes me feel uncomfortable and all of that kind of stuff. And I said, forget all of that. Forget selling. Forget building a profile. Just help people. Just share what you know and help people. And really, that's all I do. I went down that path. So I started off with that mentality. Then everybody started, content marketing is an important part of your personal brand and all this. I went, oh, yeah. And so I kind of went down that road for a while. And it felt very uncomfortable. B, it was not me. Yeah. And so I've now pulled back to it and just gone back to, I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're a student who's never going to hire me. I'll have a chat with you. I'll help as many people as I can in whatever situation I can, and I'll share what I know as I get along, and people love it. And it just, but even if they don't, I don't care. Because I'm getting as much reward out of the process of sharing. And like I do something on people, I often chat. People will comment on something I've written on LinkedIn or whatever, and so I'd reply and I'd often say, do you want just a virtual coffee, right? Do you want to grab, and I don't even look at their profile to see who they are, but the number of times I've had calls with people and I've come away going, do you know what, I learnt more out of that. They thought they were going to learn from me, but I took so much away from that experience, because we all live in little isolated bubbles otherwise.
Yeah, everybody is living their own rich life. They are the only person who has traveled the road that they've traveled, that has the experience, that has this specific lens. And through that, and through meeting and going, you seeing what I'm seeing? Or oh yeah, like here's how I see it differently. Just like this conversation. But like with any conversation, we have so much to learn from each other that it sounds that sounds trite. That sounds just like a cliche or whatever.
But it's true.
But it's the freaking truth. Yeah. It's just like oh, okay. I didn't think about it that way. Or ooh, that's like a really cool framing for it, or that's a really cool phrase, or just that stuff sinks in. I don't know.
And even for me as a consultant, why I often get hired as a consultant is because people don't know whether they're doing it right, in quotation marks or not. Right? And they want a consultant to come in to reassure them or whatever. So every single one of those conversations I have is a reference point that I can make, So if I was chatting with someone from Peloton recently, right? I'm very unlikely to ever work for them, but I can now say, oh, well, Peloton kind of take this approach in this situation. And, this is what they've learned. And that adds to the conversation. And I wish more organizations would actively share their experiences online. So one of the sectors that I've worked in most heavily is higher education. And one of the things I love about the higher education sector is they do share. Right. They've all got their own blogs talking about, the struggles they've had. They have the conferences where they all come together and bitch and moan about senior management. And, that's wonderful. And that's the way it should be. So we should all be doing that, really.
I feel like maybe that was part of, and you tell me, but it's like, I feel like that there was a window in time where that felt more common, but I think it's in that area you described at the beginning where things kind of grew up and matured, that it's like the only things that were maybe being shared by places was more around the, maybe here's like the case study of our kind of journey in this. And it's just like, it just kind of felt like well trodden and just kind of safe and whatever.
Yeah. And I think,
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I would utterly agree. I think there was a time, and I think the reason there was that time was because none of us knew anything. Really, we were making things up as we were going along. And we were working out the best way of doing it. And the only way you could find out, there was no Reddit, there was no AI you could ask.
Yeah.
You had to ask other people and you had to find
Yeah.
out from other people. And I think that has slowly got eroded, partly because of COVID. I think it stopped us meeting and coming together in maybe the ways we did, that everything matured. So there was guides to do pretty much everything. And that's the other thing I come across a lot recently, is that people go, well, what have I got to add to the conversation? It's all been said, right? But I think it's how you say it that matters more, is that your way of expressing things is going to be very different to the way that I express it. And that's going to resonate with some people, while the way I say it won't. And the example I always give is when I used to run an agency, and there was three of us. It was myself, Marcus Willington, and Chris Scott. Me and Chris were opposite ends of the spectrum. Well, I'm big picture, hate details, get bored easily, attention span of a goldfish, but full of great ideas. Chris is so detailed and so methodical. And so there were some clients that I was banned from going into the room with because I used to just wind them up, right? Well, Chris was that safe, detailed pair of hands that nurtured them, and he loved Chris. But equally the other way around, you could watch some clients, their eyes would glaze over if Chris started talking. Bless him. And that's fine, and that's the way the world should be. So that you've always got something to say, because the way you say it will resonate in a way that the way I say it won't with some people.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like, I think that there's also a fallacy that I see people get into, where it's like, oh, well, Paul's already blogged about this, so I have nothing. Well, not everyone is plugged into your world. Like you have your own sphere of people in your realm, right, that can experience something. And better yet, there's these things called hyperlinks, where you can kind of stitch a bunch of these different ideas together to sort of make, more rich meaning kind of come out the other end of it. But again, it's like, I can't help but think that the landscape right now versus over the last few decades, it feels a little more hostile to just kind of open, honest sharing. Here's perspective. It feels like everything needs to have an agenda to it, versus just like the act of, here's what I'm seeing, I feel compelled to like kind of share this, I don't know, what do you think? And now it feels like everything's got to have this bow around it.
But the irony is that I think now is the moment where it's needed more than ever, right? Partly because of what I was saying earlier about we need authentic human voices which learn mistakes and don't say things with utter confidence like an AI says them. So there's that aspect. But then there's also the aspect that, well, everything's changing again. Everything's up in the air again. You're not going to find the answers, in some nice, neat YouTube tutorial, because it really amuses me that when you go around LinkedIn at the moment, that there are AI experts. The bloody people that make these AIs are not AI experts. They don't understand how these things work, let alone us. So it's like, now is the time we need to be going, did that work for you? Did this work for you? And there is some of that. There's certainly some of that more on the software side of things and the kind of back-end development. But I don't feel that there is anywhere near that amount of thing going on within the front-end community or the UX community. Because I don't think most of us, certainly from the UX side of things, has really figured it out at all. At the moment, we just don't have a clue what we're doing with it. And I've got things that have worked for me, but I don't know they'll work for anyone else.
I think that there's a lot there, and I think that I 100% agree with you and love the framing that it's like these things are out there confidently, just saying straight up just falsehoods, like things that you're like, yeah, I know that isn't true at all, but you say it with such certitude that it's just like, So I think that there's something really interesting in we humans have this capability of saying things in such a way that I'm not so sure about this. Like I don't have this figured out. That feels like a really powerful
It is.
quality to exhibit in this moment in time. I think
But
that you're really well to point that out.
there is this huge contradiction in us because we do have this power to say, I don't know, or I'm not sure. What's your experience been? That we are social animals. But on the other hand, we crave certainty. And I see this amongst young designers a lot, that they want a process, right? I do the double diamond. I start with my discovery phase, and then I do this, and then I do that, because that's the process. And one of the things that I think I've learned over the years is that's bollocks. That doesn't, what is it? They say, what is it? Muhammad Ali or somebody said that you can have a plan until you get punched in the face or something.
Yeah, Mike Tyson quote.
Mike Tyson, right.
Yeah.
So it's that mentality that, okay, it can be great to have a double diamond and a process, but when you hit the reality of a project, all of that goes out the window.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And actually, we need to be much freer to say, look, this doesn't work in my situation. I need to adapt it. But if you've got these gurus, right? And I put myself in that category in the past. I've done it, and I still make that mistake occasionally of saying things too confidently. People go, oh, well, that must be the way to do things. When in truth, I make it up as I go along on a per project basis.
Yeah.
I have a toolkit.
Sure.
I have a big toolkit of tools, and I take different tools out on different projects. But sometimes you shouldn't do a discovery phase because it's not appropriate in that situation. Other times you might not want to do user testing until later in the project or earlier in the project, or not at all sometimes, That kind of openness and transparency, I think, is what we really need, because there are a lot of people that feel like, oh, I don't do it properly. Right? I can't share what I do because I never get any budget to do user testing. Well, hang on a minute. There are millions of people out there who don't have any budget to do user testing. So how do you work around that? Because they need to know, right? And you need to know how they work around it.
Yeah.
And that's what I like about these transition points, like at the moment where AI comes along and it breaks everything. So now all of that neat process that we had where we did things in a certain way, well, that's all rubbish now, right? Because AI has enabled us to do different things. So now is the time. Now is the time you can go, do you know what? The old way never really did work for me. Anyway, but now it certainly doesn't,
Yeah, there's this kind of like almost a false comfort, or like a false, this is how it is, or this is the right way of doing things. And a lot of it is just, it boils down to, it's like, it's just happened to calcify in a certain shape. That doesn't mean that it was the right shape. It just meant that like we got into this groove of doing things in a certain way. And I think that this moment has showed up with some dynamite to
the other problem it creates is that oftentimes the people that are talking about this kind of stuff, right, who are talking about best practice, are people like us who are very privileged and have reached a certain standing in our career where we're tending to work with a certain type of client that are often quite big. What works for those clients may be massively inappropriate for another. Take something like design systems that you write about or have done in the past. You've got an amazing structured way of thinking about design systems that's incredibly scalable, that can work for really big clients. But if I'm working for, a little 3-person business, I shouldn't be building a massive design system like that. It would be the inappropriate solution. But, I could easily go away feeling bad. Oh, I haven't done it like Brad says I should do it. Therefore, I'm a rubbish human being, So I shouldn't have picked on your stuff, should I?
No. We see it. We've seen it all the time. It's like people look over their shoulders at material design and whatever, and they're like, we would love to do that or something like that, but like we don't have gobs of, just people and infinite time and budget. It's like, it's like you're comparing yourself against like a giant, very mature, very like whatever thing. And it's like, you don't, it should do the things that you need it to do and little else. as a consultant, how have you balanced the pressure of feeling like you need to roll in with those best practices?
I try not to get myself into situations that have me on that kind of pedestal. So
That's good.
because inevitably I fail and mess up if I do that. There are many organizations, especially my bigger clients, that want that want, here's a set of recommendations in a very big document that we can send to our senior managers. And I'm absolutely fine producing that if I can do it with the in-house team, right? Because what there is inevitably there is a group of people that know way more than me about the circumstances within that organization and are much more aware of it, and they know the constraints and the limitations and all of the rest of it. And my job is really just to articulate that, maybe in a slightly more businessy way than they're comfortable doing, as often the case in my situation, and also to add my credibility to what they've already been saying. And I've not got an axe to grind as an external person. I don't have an agenda, so I can come in and reinforce what they want to say and add impartiality to it. So that's really what I see my job as, not as having all of the answers. And that's why, you know, I joke, especially with people where they've had me forced upon them, which happens sometimes. The first thing I do is go into and say, well, what have you been saying for 3 years that I can now regurgitate and everybody will suddenly listen to? You know, and I'm very honest with them that that's what I'll do. But my job is to push through what you already know needs happening. And I think that's a big part of my role. What about you? I mean, do you do that kind of engagement?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I have done for the last 12, 13 years. And, kind of shifted gears a little bit recently, but same thing. And it's what we were talking about earlier with just being able to share. Everybody's kind of coming at things with different perspectives, and these things aren't in competition with one another. It really kind of takes the listening to the people who have been living frustration for years and years, that know exactly what to do, but just for whatever reason, just based on how human beings work, they're not being listened to, and it takes the outside voice in order to sort of carry it over the line. And it's that partnership. It's really a dance of kind of a marriage of those different perspectives that ultimately takes things forward. And so that's true for consulting, that's true for blogging, that's true for like a lot of things, where it's like one person by themselves isn't going to have all the answers. It really is in that sort of rich, like, here's my experience, here's this experience, here's these things, sure, hand wavy best practices, but it all kind of comes together in this something that feels like, this feels directional, this feels good, this feels like this actually marries or this actually ladders up to a reality that we could all kind of agree to. I really like that because it doesn't put the burden on any one person. And I'm similar, where it's like, I hate being well, Brad, what do you think? And I could say, yep, here's what I've seen in my experience, you know, ducking my heads into all these different places and working with all these different teams. But ultimately, it is in the people that are there, the people that are living in reality, that are frustrated, that know what needs to happen in order to get out of that frustrated place. And frankly, like, I've learned through doing this for so long, is that most people just want to be heard. Most people want to be validated. Most people don't like being in situations where you're operating in daily frustration. And they're just like, people are willing to do whatever, compromise in order to make that happen. And so I really like being put in the position of helping people get to that point. So that's always been, like, I think one of the most satisfying parts of doing that kind of work is just like actually giving people the real excuse to just work together and like have fun. Maybe it doesn't need to be like this. Maybe all those weird ass best practices and double diamonds and all that stuff. Like maybe none of that matters. Maybe you all just need to get in a freaking room and talk about what it is you should be making together.
And part of the problem there is departmental silos, job descriptions, all those kinds of things where they put up barriers between different people collaborating. You know, this is my area, this is your area. And the truth is that a lot of certainly what I do will cross over those, because the user experience doesn't give a monkey's arse about organizational silos. And so that's where people get uncomfortable, because they feel like they may be treading on each other's turf and somebody is interfering with my area and that kind of thing. My hope that one of the things that will come out of AI is actually a move back towards the generalist. That we used to live in a world, you know, I've talked about my first book with website owner that was responsible for the whole of the website. But we used to live in the world where we all had a good understanding or we did a lot of the jobs ourselves, right? And then we began to specialize and we would become more and more and more and more specialized. But what I'm seeing from AI is it's given me the opportunities to maybe start pushing the edges of roles a little bit more and allowing people to take on areas that aren't primarily their roles. Now, that's not to say we can get rid of the other roles. So a great example is coding, right? You know, I used to code like all web designers used to do. If you go back far enough, I mean, that fell out of favor. But you know, there would have been a time where, you know, and there is still a time where any good developer would have slapped me around the head and said, whatever you do, do not touch any code, Paul. You are not a responsible adult. You cannot be trusted with code. And they would be right. And they still are right to an extent. But what AI has given me is the ability to maybe prototyping code and try things out and provide a more detailed spec to the grown-up that will write the proper code with security and accessibility and all those things that I won't have thought of, right? The edges of the roles are bleeding a little bit, right? And that gets really interesting. And that then comes back to our attitude. How are we going to respond to that? Are we going to feel threatened by that? Or are we going to embrace that? So one example of that I've become a huge proponent of, and the reason you originally reached out to me was because I was writing about the democratization of UX. And my argument here is that most UX teams are under-resourced and underfunded, right? You know, so there's a handful of people. You know, if you look outside of, you know, if I look at a typical agency, there might be a 1-to-2 ratio between designers and developers. You'll never find that in-house, right? There'll always be way more developers than there are designers. Yeah. So you have this underfunded team that maybe can touch a slither of the user experience, right? But now we're beginning to get into a world where, hang on a minute, we can start empowering a developer to do good make good UX decisions, or a business analyst, or a project manager, or a marketer, and even maybe to do a little bit of testing themselves, or maybe do a little bit of prototyping themselves. Whoa, I don't know about that. They'll do it shit, right? Yeah, they will, compared to you, the professional. But you're touching what, say 10% of the overall user experience within your organization, a slither, because you're under-resourced, right? So let's say you're doing that 10% at 100% quality, top, best you can possibly do, right? Great. So you've now hit 10%. You've improved 10% of the overall user experience. But if you empower everybody across the organization, even if they just do it to 50%, right? That's going to be significantly better than what you would have done yourself. So our roles start then changing from being one of doers, right, to being one of conductors, right? Conducting AI agents, conducting humans using AI, providing the resources, the teaching material, the training, the governance frameworks, everything people need to succeed in that area. And I think the same could be said of developers, right? Instead of going, well, designers are beginning to come onto our turf, developers should be embracing that and saying, okay, how can we empower designers to do it less shit, right? So when we have to pick it up, right? There's a better foundation to work on rather than us having to start from scratch. So we all need to let go of our little kind of areas of control and start embracing a more fluid, management system, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. I've used this mental model or metaphor or whatever in the past with a lot of things, but it's like there's bricks. Here are brick people that have well-defined roles, right? I am a developer. I do this, right? I am a designer. Like the people yelling at you, don't touch code. You're a designer. You're this shape of person. And I see new material as being more of a mortar function that kind of oozes in between all the cracks and gives sort of this connective tissue and sort of strengthens things and or has the ability to. That's not a given that will happen, but I think that you're touching on that dynamic really, really well, where it's like we're all kind of able to expand outside of our normal parameters or our historic parameters. You can meet that, I think, as you rightly said, as a threat thing where it's like, whoa, you don't do that kind of work. That's my job. Or you could go, oh, cool, you're interested in this area, or, and I'm willing to learn. And how do you kind of use this moment to kind of bring people closer together, especially across different people with different incentives, different priorities, different fears, different whatever, they're different people with different dynamics. And I think that one of the things that's particularly interesting about AI as a technology is its ability to translate into different languages. And so when you take it, you could take that literally as like, yes, this is being translated from English into, Japanese or something like that. But you could also treat this as here is the BA who's caring about this from their perspective. Here is the QA engineer that's at the end of the line that cares about these other things. Here's all these people that individually kind of have the pieces of the puzzle, but very, very often it's hard to bring that together into a cohesive whole. And I feel like this new material allows more of that, where it's just like, right, everybody throw your hopes, fears, dreams, research, give me all your PDFs, give me all your whatever. We're going to just like throw it all in the stew, throw it all in the big cauldron in the middle. And we're going to make some cool shit together that is actually well considered and is taking into account all of these different, sometimes competing dynamics.
And the real power with that is that a lot of organizations and people within organizations and people generally, we're kind of fundamentally selfish, right? And I don't mean that in a horrible way, but we want our lives to be easy, right? We don't want to sit in more meetings. We don't want to have more work than we need to, etc., etc. And certainly so much of the stuff that UX teams want is asking people to do more, right? I want you to do user research. I want you to stop your project. Right? I know you've got a deadline. I know you've got a budget, but we're going to stop all of that and we're going to go and find out what users want. And then the other common problem from UX professionals is like, I want a seat at the table, right? No, we don't want you in the room. You'll only have other opinions and other ideas that will make the meeting is bad enough as it is. Can we just get through this and get things moving?
Right.
And so what AI, I think, offers us is very low barrier entry points for people to start thinking about the user experience without overcomplicating it. So the one example that I've come up with is most UX teams, they've got tons of research that they've done, right? And they might even, let's imagine they're super organized and they've got a user research repository where all this kind of stuff is held. No one's going to look through that shit, right? Only you care about that. And every time somebody wants to know something about the user, we're sitting in a meeting, we're discussing, should we do this, add this feature to this thing? Oh, we ought to find out what the user thinks. Oh, yeah, but that means going to Bill. And, that's another week gone waiting to hear back from Bill. Let's just make a decision and move on. But imagine if you connect that user repository with an AI that's got a persona built on that user repository that can respond like the user would in that situation. Sure, that's not as good as real user research. But now in that meeting, they can go, well, I wonder what our users would think of this. What will you think of this? Into the AI, and then they got a response. Now, is that as good as real user research? No, but at least it's getting the user in the room. At least it's getting you in the room. And it can even, the AI can even say, well, based on our UX playbook, where someone has taken the time to document all this stuff, really, it would be quite good to run a survey around this, right? But it suddenly makes it all so much more accessible. Yep. On top of which, the AI can also be logging all of those questions that are getting asked so that the central UX team can then go away and do additional research that further improves the repository. And that's where AI can be helping. Yeah. It can be facilitating the easy flow of an integration of different disciplines without this kind of awkward, oh, bloody hell, we've got to have somebody else in a meeting, you know?
Yep. No, you hit the nail on the head, and I've said similar like elsewhere. Is like, but you said the word beautifully, which is like facilitation. It is a facilitator. It brings things in so that during our meetings, we're no longer just actively fighting and trying to talk each other out of doing the work, because it's laborious and expensive to make that prototype or do that thing or go bother Bill or like figure that stuff out. It's just like, we can't be bothered. So we're going to spend our time together in meetings. Let's push back. Yeah. And you're like, that's thoroughly depressing. What if you're like, in the course of a meeting, just on demand, this stuff just kind of comes to you, and it's not an approximation of it. It's like often just the actual raw stuff that can be brought in and brought closer to you, and that could happen from UX research, that could happen from a business standpoint, that could happen from a designer perspective, a developer perspective, like literally like any perspective. It's like, like I have stuff for that. And then again, you throw it in the cauldron, and then your meetings become less, let's like talk each other out of doing things, and instead go, we got all this good stuff here. Let's explore it together. Let's actually see what this gets us. Is that
not transforming as well, your job? I mean, I feel like I've got a superpower. So I go into a new organization, right? And I'm sure you feel this, or at least I hope you do. I hope it's not just me. But when I go into it, I feel utterly overwhelmed instantly, because everybody's throwing this information at you and you're kind of passing it all. Now I'm hungry for it. Now I'm saying, any PowerPoint presentation you've ever made that's vaguely related to this, any document, any data source, anything, give me it all. Yeah. And then I can push it through an AI that consolidates it all, and you can begin to see a narrative emerge of what's gone wrong or what's gone right and how we might move through it. Then you start doing your stakeholder interviews, where you talk to all the different people and they share their perspectives. All of that gets fed in as well. And you end up with this really, and like you say, it extracts this kind of common narrative or this common thread that you can follow. And yes, of course, you still got to make judgments about it. You still need a human in the loop. But processing that vast amount of information, it's so much easier than it would be doing it personally, It's through those conversations that you have where you're able to start sort of playing some of this stuff back to actually see if it matches reality, because there is like a real risk in just kind of being like, cool, we just threw a bunch of artifacts in there, it spat out like the it doesn't truth. Mean it's and right. It's like but that's where it's like, you as a facilitator, as a human facilitator, you're able to sort of like start holding up a mirror and sort of say like, how does this feel as far as some trends or these things that have like happened. One of my favorite questions to ask is just like, what haven't I considered yet? Yeah. What is opaque, or what is like not the thing that I'm like directly asking for, but like what are like some subterranean or like different trends or
alternative ways of thinking about this that is used as a vehicle for expanding our human judgment and exercising critical thinking. And then
Yeah.
you collectively, like as a group of human beings, get to sort of explore this territory together. It just feels, it feels healthy, and because it is like kind of taking that stuff that would otherwise be just very, very, very laborious to put together. It's like you could probably get there on your own, but just having something that's like a lot more immediate allows you to have more fruitful conversations and make better decisions sooner. That feels like a good thing. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think there's another aspect to it, is that it's very easy for you to misinterpret what someone has said. And AI is really good. If you ask it to summarize what somebody has said, like in a meeting or whatever, it can often throw up your own misinterpretation of what happened. There's a great example recently where I was talking to a new client. She said, well, why are you so much more expensive than other people? I'd quoted her a number. Right. And she said, you're much more expensive than everybody else. So I went into this long diatribe about how I'm worth it, because, you know, obviously I am. But when I read back the transcript afterwards, or where I got AI to talk it through with me, it said she misunderstood you. She thought you were quoting a per month rate when you were quoting a year rate, right? And those kinds of things. I mean, I get things like that when I do user interviews as well, that I'll come away with a load of notes. AI will come away with a completely different set of notes where it's seen different things in that meeting. Now, obviously, you have to say, how did you come to that conclusion? Give me a quote, so that you know it's not just making stuff up as it likes to. But it's really useful. Although I don't understand this whole thing about hallucination, right? It really amuses me. Oh, you can't trust AI, it hallucinates, right? Well, hang on a minute. So do people. We hallucinate all the time. We make up shit all the time. We misremember things. So why are we holding AI to a higher standard? You know, it's, as long as you know that it makes things up, and as long as you get it to justify, you know, its statements, that's okay. You know, you just got to take what it says with a pinch of salt, like you do with a human. We've been too used to computers always being right. I think that's the problem.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And it gets into, here's math, here's like deterministic programming code, right? 2 and 2 always equals 4. And so it's a very weird thing, but viewed through the lens of, here's fallible human beings with our own biases, with our own whatever kind of instincts and stuff. And the idea, hopefully, just as we do with groups of human beings, as we've been talking about in this conversation, is just like sharing our different perspectives and kind of figuring out where the truth is somewhere in the middle, and hopefully using our conversations and our mirrors up to each other to find out, where is this just my own personal bias or privilege or whatever bleeding into things, and like, how do we sort of arrive at a healthy middle ground? And we now have this extra tool that helps us do that even further, right? Where it itself is hallucinating and making these things, but when used appropriately, you could kind of find it's like, where is the truth in between? And I think that getting to that point where we're sort of using this tool as a way of exercising more critical thinking and more judgment, it's 100% possible. Again, that doesn't mean that it's a given that's like an inherent, like, but it can be used that way. Like, this tool can be used as a way to facilitate human judgment and critical thinking.
I love your idea of, you could take lots of different perspectives of different people within an organization and get AI to extract commonality, or to help you understand those different perspectives. I think that's really good. It just reminded me of something I did a while ago on my own business, right? Because one of the things, I'm sure you feel the same, right? You're by yourself. You don't have a partner in your business, do you? Is it just you?
I work with my brother. You work with your brother. So he works.
So I used to run an agency, as I said, with 2 other people, but I don't anymore. It's just me, and I miss that, right? I miss being able to talk it over with other people. And so I came up with this stupid idea of, well, okay, if I could create my ideal board of directors, who would it be? Right. So I wrote out a list of people, different authors and stuff that I like. And I got AI to go away. I want you to do deep research using Perplexity on these people, their standpoints, their point of view, all the rest of it. I consolidated all that together, pushed it into a large language model. And so now I ask business questions of my virtual board. And it comes back with all these different perspectives on the problem. Now, obviously, you don't take that literally and you have to use your judgment. But when you work by yourself, it's really good for challenging your view of things, your world view of things. Because this is the big problem. It's like, I see this amongst UX professionals all the time. Why does nobody care about the user? All these people should care about the user. Well, how much do you care about health and safety? Right? Or HR or finance. You don't read any of their memos or their emails, right? But all those things are really important to those departments.
It all matters. Right?
Yeah. So we all live in our own little bubbles, and anything that can challenge that, I think, is just brilliant, you know?
Yeah. And that's the thing, is just like, here are these things, here are these regulatory blah, blah, blah. Here's these things that, like, those people are often just the messengers of whatever the industry is. But it's the parable of the blind men and the elephant, right? Which is just like, everyone approaches the elephant and the elephant is like a snake because they're touching the trunk, and the elephant is like a tree because they're touching the leg. And it is really through everyone's collective perspective that you can paint a full picture. And again, that historically has been very hard to come by, very laborious to come by, because the chances of getting that regulatory person in the room with the UX designer and the engineering manager and forget about it. Like those opportunities don't come up nearly as often as they should. It's where, like, this idea of just kind of having something that can help triangulate and synthesize and kind of help find what is that overlapping Venn diagram that sort of does the things that every single group needs to do. And then also, better yet, that actually like addresses people's individual fears and risks and stuff like that. I think that stuff's like really powerful too, because people are motivated by, like, we want to do a good job. We have dreams and aspirations. I think that's probably true. That's an innate human quality. We're aspiring to something. And then we also care a lot about, we're fearful creatures. We have, there are risks, there are things that get us promoted, there are things that get us fired. And I think, like, if you're able to sort of extract that from groups of human beings, even though those fears, those hopes, those dreams, all of those things are going to be individually different, there are ways to sort of extract that, use it in useful ways, and sort of find the way that is the sweet spot between everything that is just like, oh, okay, yeah, like, here's a way forward that ticks all of these boxes for all of these different people. As things have grown up and matured, things have calcified in this place where people have their own lanes. We kind of have this understanding people aren't stepping on each other's toes. And here are the protocols for interacting with these people. And you go through these JIRA tickets and these different things and stuff like that. What I'm finding, and I've always found it difficult to do, is to just be like, you could just get together and like work together and jam on some things and like have just like a creative conversation and make some stuff together. And people are just like, ugh. Like, I hear what you're saying, but also that feels scary. Like, I don't know. It feels like things have stratified, things have calcified in kind of an unhealthy dynamic. And now it's just like, kind of like, okay, here's this tool. And we get it a lot, just even with our AI and design systems course that we're putting together, is just like, how do we use this to like facilitate like Handoff, or to make Handoff go better? It's like, well, what if you just remove Handoff entirely? What does it look like to just maybe use this as a means to come together and build stuff together?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the organization. because I think logistically that can when the organization reaches a certain size, logistically just getting everybody in the room to jam on something together is a logistical nightmare. The way that I'm tending to do it is almost the complete opposite of that. Yeah, I agree with the essentials of what you're saying there, which is that I'm tending to take the attitude of trying to get beyond the stepping on each other's toes, that it's okay to step on each other's toes, right?
Yes.
So rather than necessarily let's get everybody together and do it all in a room together, which can be difficult to do, and I've struggled to do that. I'm instead going down the lines of, well, look, start letting go control of your area and empower other people to have a go at what you do. Right? And so, you know, for example, it's stupid. Let's imagine an organization with a design system. Okay, they've got a design system in place. It's stupid that the developer has to come back to a designer every time they want a new user interface designed, right?
Yeah.
You've got a design system that's got accessibility baked into it and everything else that needs to be considered from a UI point of view. All you need is a little bit of extra documentation in your design system that says, which probably should be there anyway, which says this is when you use a radio button compared to when you use a checkbox, and this is where just laying out a bit of rules that can even be fed into an AI, so an AI can follow those rules. If the UX team create some associated documentation that outlines this is how landing pages are built, this is how donation flows are built, or whatever else, then really why get involved in that, right? But what you do, you don't just then make that the developer's problem and say, well, that's your problem now. You say, well, we'll still be responsible for it. We're going to take the blame if it goes wrong. We're also here if you want to show us stuff, but we just don't want to get in the way. We'll help you as much as you want to, but don't feel you have to come to us. If it's just a little thing, you can get, you know, AI to produce your interface based on our rules or whatever else. You know, we insert ourselves into situations where we don't really always need to be there. And then that enables us to look at the bigger picture, right? And to start doing the more strategic work that we bitch and moan about that we've never got time to do at the minute, you know?
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. And that's it, like you just perfectly described, I think, what we're getting at with our course, and what we've been kind of doing is just like, how do you just like push this stuff down, make this stuff available so that humans, machines, and hybrids of the two can just kind of like do things. And when you say make a landing page, it builds it using the best practices that you collectively have agreed are the things that make up a good landing page and stuff. So it's a different shape of kind of the same thing.
And this is where I've been really cracking on about something that hasn't taken. You wrote this amazing book on atomic design, and design systems took off, and everybody went, "Oh, Brad's wonderful. He's so clever." Right. So design systems have really taken off. My thing, right, which sits alongside that, is a digital playbook, right, with standard operating procedures and all of that kind of stuff. And no, that's not sexy like a design system is. So everybody's ignored that. But as you could tell, I'm deeply bitter about this, because especially now, because that repository, if you have a repository of all of that information, AI eats that shit up and can now churn out, you know, designs that are not just using the design system, but are using it right, are using it from a usable, accessible, you know, readable, scannable, all of the other oddballs perspective. And so those two components actually, I think, sit together very well as a whole. But unfortunately, my half is not as trendy as your half, because so, you know, I'm bitter.
But yeah, you shouldn't be, because I think it's all, like you said, I think you said it really well. It's like, this is all in play. It's like, here are these things, these assets and stuff like that. But it's like, without the proper instruction manual, without like proper and well considered ways of sort of assembling it all, you're going to end up with a freaking mess on your hands.
But you see, talking about standard operating procedures sounds dull. What I need to start doing is I need to call them AI skills, right?
Yeah,
Because
there
of
we
course
go.
that's trendy at the moment, but it's essentially a standard operating procedure written in Markdown. So I'll just call it a different name and it'll be fine.
Sexy operating procedures would be more sexy.
I'm not convinced. I don't think we're fooling anyone with that one.
One thing you joked at the very beginning about retirement.
Yes.
As you've been sort of on this journey for a long time, as your daughter's sort of coming up through, you get to see her kind of career sort of starting. Can you talk about that a little bit? Just like it's through the lens of longevity, but also kind of like new chapters and kind of what comes next when you feel like you've been riding all of these waves for so long. There's clearly an excitement and enthusiasm and a lot to be digging into in this day and age. But I'm also very curious about like when you have been working at something since 1994 and it's just like, oh, okay, like here we are all these years later. Like what your journey and like thought process been around that? Like what do you see in terms of like
Is that
approaching
a very long way of
retirement and stuff?
Yeah,
So,
it's a very long way of saying, are you going to retire, Paul? Come on,
no,
sort your act out. Get out of the way for the younger people.
No. It's definitely not that. But I am very interested in just kind of like how people are approaching that, because there's not a standard operating procedure for that.
No, there's not, because it's the first generation that are beginning to get to that point now.
Yep.
People like Steve Krug, Jacob Nielsen, they're a little bit ahead of me. The trouble is, there are aspects I absolutely do want to retire from, and there are aspects that I don't. I love what I do, and the bit that I love more than anything else is helping people. I know that sounds so trite, doesn't it?
No, dude.
But I love helping people when they get stuck on projects and I can unstick them. I love giving people advice because I think I know everything. I love all of that stuff. So I want to carry on doing that really as long as people will listen to me. I don't imagine myself retiring. I don't imagine myself stopping learning new stuff, because I see so many people that retire and then turn into vegetables because they're not continually engaging with the world. And I look at my dad is, even though I'm mid-50s now, my dad is still a role model to me, and he's still very much active in his 70s and still lecturing and still teaching and all that kind of stuff. So
beautiful.
I imagine that. But what the bit that I want to retire from is this as running your own business, is having to bring in enough money every month. That's the bit I'm done with. That anxiety of am I going to pay the bills this month? And it's not. I mean, I'm pretty fortunate these days, but even so, it'd be nice to be rid of that. Yeah. And in some ways, I am kind of semi-retired. I probably realistically am working 4 or 5 hours a day rather than 8 now, which is nice.
Beautiful.
And I spend most of my time traveling. So we spent 3 years traveling around the States in an RV, which was amazing. And we're beginning to do the same thing now in UK this year, and then next year across into Europe. I've built a lifestyle business very, very intentionally. Yes. I'm not going to get rich. I'm not going to be able to sell my agency or my consultancy. It's all built around me. I don't care. I'm more interested in living life now than I am when I retire, but I don't want to screw myself over equally, because I want to not have to bring in what I have to bring in every month.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so it sounds like you've done a lot of active work to get to that place where you can get into an RV and do that. That obviously requires a lot of careful planning and consideration. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so it took about a decade, I think, from when I first had the idea to where the business, because when I first had the idea, it was my wife really wanted to do it, and I was like, I don't know whether that's practical, I don't know how to do that, etc. But she was determined, because to begin with I was still at an agency, right? I'm still running the agency. So I was running that with other people. That ties you down and limits what you can do and what hours you need to be available and all of those kinds of things. So that had to change to begin with. Then I had to build up the new business because, you can't do it from day one, although I was very fortunate. And then the big problem was connectivity for a while. And I hate this. I hate it with a passion, but I have to be grateful to Elon for Starlinks, because I wouldn't be able to do it very easily without Starlink. I'm using Starlink at the moment. And there were various other logistics. I had to break my clients into the idea that I would only be available in mornings for my American clients and afternoons for my UK clients. I had to wean myself off of Australian clients because I just couldn't get that to work. Then I had to learn how to work more intensely, so that I could work 4 hours in a very efficient manner. And of course I had to get my rates to a point where that was enough for working 4 hours a day. So there was a lot of moving parts to it, which happened over a series of years. And I got lucky as well. There was a big, that's a part of it as well. For example, going back to Starlink, we started doing this going, well, we're going to have to be in areas where there was cell coverage. And we started, and a month in, Starlink came out, and suddenly we could be, in the middle of a dried up riverbed in Utah, and I can still do my Zoom calls,
That's incredible. That's incredible. And thank you for painting that picture, because I'm sure that people, like, to the outside observer, if you just see yourself riding around in an RV, you go, oh, well, that must be nice.
Yeah.
Talking about like a decade of work to lead to that moment. I really love that, because it's like, you just designed that for yourself and your family. Like, that's beautiful.
I've always been a bit like that. I'm always this, in fact, I feel lost if I've not got something I'm working towards. So, that I had a weird time when, we would still be in America to this day if it wasn't for your current president and his attitude towards people coming into his country. When we stopped doing that, I was kind of lost. It was like, well, what's my aim now? So that was a tricky time for a little while. So yeah, I do like to have a plan I'm working towards. Yeah, but it never goes as you think it does. Our poor daughter, she went off to university, and it was like, right, bye, we're going to the other side of the Atlantic. Best of luck. She just got abandoned. But
I'm sure she was crying the whole time.
No, she was one term in. We were intending to wait a year, and she had she just took a duck to water to it, and just wasn't contacting us or calling us, and she was well settled, and it was like, well, there's no point of us being here then, is there?
Well, there we go. That's amazing. That's amazing. You're also getting at, though, it's like, what's all of this for? What's money for? What's running a business? What's running your own business for? And I think that this is something that, with this new landscape, who the hell knows how this is going to shape up? But it does feel like there might be more opportunities for more people to exercise their own agency and autonomy and stuff, and do things in a way that works with what they want to get out of life, and to not have to wait until you hit 63 and get a gold watch in order to finally start traveling. So I really love it. Could you speak to that aspect of it, or it's just like, here's money, here's what it does, here's what you could point it at in order to help you live a richer life?
This is because I coach lots of people, but one of the groups I coach, I think I've already mentioned this, is freelancers and agency owners. And they come in and they talk about what they want to achieve with their business, we haven't got enough sales, or, I'm thinking of hiring people and all the rest of it. And the first question I always ask is, forget the business. What do you want your life to be? Because I often think people start from the wrong premise. It always reminds me of the Rocky Horror Show and Seymour, that your business becomes this monster that needs to be constantly fed. And actually, your business needs to be facilitating your life, not your life facilitating your business. And I think a lot of people get trapped in this scenario where they go, well, it has to be this way. I mean, the typical thing is, I have to work 7 days a week, multiple, long hours every day because I'm not earning enough money. I'm not earning enough money because I can't charge more. I can't charge more because my clients wouldn't accept me charging higher. And I'm like, no. You're looking at the entire thing back to front. You got to start by saying, what do I want, right, from my life? How much money do I need to earn to do that? What would my hourly rate, how many hours am I willing to work to do that? What would my hourly rate be? What type of clients do I need in order to be able to do that? And so starting from the lifestyle, I think, is really important. And I mean, I've got friends of my parents had a kid a little bit younger than me, and he moved into the same industry and has been hugely successful in the field. And he's now probably mid-40s, coming up to 50, and he's semi-retired. He's retired basically at that point. But he bust his gut to do that, right? He worked up in London, he had long commutes, he worked huge hours, earned a fortune, all the rest of it. And that's great. That's what he wanted. And now he can retire early, and that's great. I'm not criticizing that. That's his choice. I didn't want that for my life. I wanted to be able to earn enough to live the life that I wanted to live. You've got to be clear of what you want going in. Do you want to earn a load of money and retire early, or pay off your mortgage or whatever else? Do you want to be able to travel? Do you want to be able to take every Wednesday afternoon off to go play golf or, do whatever? And I don't think people have a clear enough idea of what they actually want from their lives, And don't get me wrong, that's not easy to know that, especially when you're trapped in a cycle of I'm just doing work because I've got to do work,
Yep. I think that there's this kind of chaotic moment in time. The wave is very sort of foamy and thrashy, and like everybody is just kind of caught up in it, that there's not really a lot of time or space to put yourself into that headspace of, well, what exactly do I want? But I think that there's so much of like the, Sorry,
ironically, it's also the best time because everything's going to shit anyway. That's a huge exaggeration. But everything's in turmoil. So what have you got to lose? It's like we set up our agency as the .com bubble burst because we got made redundant. So what do we have to lose? Right. And actually, I think it's much harder to make those lifestyle changes when everything's very level and safe.
100%.
You almost need the push, don't you, really, sometimes?
Yeah.
Of going, well, I'm going to get fired and replaced with AI anyway, so why don't I try something new,
Yeah, that is really well said. And I agree with you. When things are comfortable, it's very, very difficult to rock that boat, that it really takes sometimes some hard, which sucks, that it sometimes requires that. But those are really important moments. Those are important seams, that these are moments to capitalize on, to basically sort of take a step back. I promise you that the hype cycle, the fervor will all still be there. But it's like kind of taking a step back and figuring out what it is you want. Did you have anything that's been particularly helpful for you defining what that is? It sounds like your wife certainly had like a plan.
She tells me.
Or like had something. But she tells you.
She says, I want more
Here's
money.
what you want out of life.
Yeah, I want more money, or I want to travel. Make it happen, Paul. No.
Yeah.
I honestly couldn't tell you. Although I'm a very optimistic person, that I'm sure almost naively optimistic, as maybe it's come across in this interview, I'm also somebody who is easily dissatisfied with life, right? So I often want to change things. I'm always stuck in this office. I want to get out in the world, right? And I'm almost motivated by dissatisfaction a lot of the time. I get bored very easily is the other big thing for me. So I'm always wanting to try new things. And then sometimes I'll try all these new things and they won't resonate. And then I hit something and it just feels right. And I will pursue that regardless. I'm also very lucky in my personality. I mean, this is every personality trait has its pros and its cons, and this is a good example of that. But I am one of those people that tends to run in where angels fear to tread and not think through consequences at all. And that can be very useful when it comes to trying new things and going in new directions. And so my inability to think something through and think through the consequences maybe works in my advantage. Maybe if I thought more, I wouldn't actually do stuff. I don't know.
But you see what happens when people do spend too much time thinking about things.
Paralyze yourself. They end up
100%. We both see that. So it's like, it's the there's kind of risk taking, and then there's kind of just basic responsibility almost of sorts of just like kind of going like, you're not just going to go right, sell everything we own and just put it all on black on the roulette wheel or like something like that.
I think it helps if you can nurture or not nurture, the opposite of nurture, crush the fear of failure. It's okay to try things and then not work out. I think it always ultimately works out. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I've been through some horrendous times in my career. Before we started recording, I talked about, how I burnt myself out and all of that kind of stuff. There have been times when I've really screwed up badly, but it recovers, and there's a kind of great attitude that I absolutely love, which is everything is in a constant state of flux and a constant state of change. So the bad times won't last forever, but neither will the good times, right? It's always changing and it's always moving. And as long as you keep moving with it, it'll work itself out. And I know that's naive in some situations, and I know it doesn't work out for everybody all of the time, but it's still a good attitude to have if you can lie to yourself enough to believe it.
But I don't think that it's lying. It's being quite honest with which is things are changing. Even these times of calm, of relative calm.
Yeah, that'll go.
That's been a hard thing for me after kind of years and years of kind of varied traumas. When the times have been calmer, and they thankfully, at least in this moment in time, are, I have that kind of looking over my shoulder a little bit, and there's a guardedness, or I'm kind of vigilant. But at the same time, I think that even though that sucks, I've kind of learned to sort of translate most of that into just a constant state of gratitude for every day that I'm like not on fire.
I mean, obviously it helps to go, this bad period isn't going to last forever. That's easy, right? We all like that. But this good period is not going to last forever.
Yeah.
That's a harder skill to come to terms with, but it's very releasing when you get there. I mean, take, for example, when Mr. Trump started, changing the rules about traveling around America and what we could do. And we had to come to the conclusion that this thing we've been doing for 3 years had come to an end. And we loved it. We loved every minute of it. But being able to let go and say, okay, that was a good time, but it's gone, right? And it's now time to find the next thing and move on to the next thing. And I think that applies in personal life, but it applies in your career as well.
Yeah.
I remember when I was laid off, not when I was laid off, what am I talking about? I laid myself off from the agency, and I stepped back from that. And that was a very hard thing to let go of. And I mourned losing it, but it now allowed me to turn my attention to the next thing and what was going to come next. And I think that's good. It's all right that everything passes, Yeah. Sorry, we've got very profound, haven't we, here?
No. No, I think it's important because whether you've been at it for a while or a lot of people are still getting into it along the way, that bit of self-reflection and that bit of just understanding the cyclical nature of things, the constant state of change, how we feel about it, how we react towards it, what we do about it, what actions we do take, all of that matters. Like, that's what really all of this is, like, what all of this is for.
And from a really practical point of view, I think it's particularly relevant to those of us who run our own businesses, where that day when you lose that really good client, right, because they just decide to go somewhere else, and you can really beat yourself up from that. You can think, oh, what have I done wrong? I've messed up. But everything passes, right? Everything people sometimes change supplier just because they feel it's time for a change, and no other reason than that. You got to try and be as chilled about these things as you can, and allow things to come and go. I should be a Buddhist monk. I think I've gone very Zen all of a sudden. I've got the haircut for it. So,
you got the hair, you're right, ready for it. But I do think it's good advice. It's like, go easy on yourself. By all means, I think, like, feel the feelings, like when there's loss, when there's hard, it's like, let all that stuff in, but at the same time, have it serve its time. Things need to run their course, and that's different for each person individually. But at the same time, you do sort of see it crop up in the form of resentment over time, where the people haven't had the chance to kind of like let it go and just move on to the next chapter. It's like, if it weren't just for that one thing, I could have made it. If the coach had only put me in it. Yeah. If the coach only put me in, I would have been been an Olympian.
That says the difference between us, right? You're using a sports analogy. You know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of the first episode of Deep Space Nine. Did you ever watch Deep Space Nine?
I know of it. I never watched it though. Yeah.
So in Deep Space Nine, you've got this character called Cisco, and his wife gets killed very dramatically in the first episode, and then he meets these aliens, these very advanced aliens that exist outside of time, and they're very confused because Cisco seems to live in the past, in this moment when he lost his wife, and he'd never been able to move on from that. And I often think about that shit episode because I'm a massive nerd, and I will argue it's a good episode actually, but if you're not a Trekkie, fair enough, of that idea that we can live in the past and we get stuck in there, almost like you were saying. You look back on those traumatic times and you're waiting for what we talk about in our family, talk about waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something else to go wrong, because we're kind of trapped in that mindset. And so getting into that mindset of, okay, that happened, I'm acknowledging that, I'm living with that, I'm accepting that, but I'm looking forward. I'm trying to live. Ideally, you should live in the present, but I kind of live in the future. What's coming next? What's over the hill?
Yeah. And there's an art to being in the present, but also doing the good work
I haven't quite worked that
looking
out
at.
Yeah. I'm always shiny thing over there. That's what I want.
But it does sound like you've translated a fair amount into gratitude, even as you are excited by the next shiny thing. It's like you realize what you have.
I've been very fortunate. I mean, my timing was impeccable and pure luck that I got into the industry. And that's why I'm so pissed off with my poor daughter, because I just walked in at the beginning of the internet and just went poof. Well, she's just come out of just coming out of university, and she's hit with this. Oh, by the way, we just changed all the rules after you've spent however many thousands of pounds on your education. It's like, oh, poor girl,
But at the same time, it is in those moments that her generation, they're going to be in this position of inventing what's comes next. And that's, it is a very, very strange thing to kind of put those things in to contrast with each other. And don't get me wrong, that's not to trivialize like the real, the bottom rung of the ladder being sawed off. Like it seems like across the board.
Yeah.
But at the same time, your daughter's inventive and creative, and so are her peers. And I have to think that even that kind of lousy landscape will work out.
And I believe that. I believe they'll make their own ladder. Just like you know, in some ways I did at the beginning of the web, you know, and
Yep.
but I do think you've also got to be grateful for the breaks that you get. And I did get some good breaks, you know.
Yep.
Just wandering blindly into the internet. You know, I was an art student, you know, my job prospects were Burger King, you know, but I happened to see in our studio a post-it note stuck on a board that said IBM are looking for interns for a year out. And I thought, oh, that'd be good experience for me, you know, to do an interview, not to get the job. I didn't think I was going to get the job. So I ran for this, and it was to work on their first ever multimedia PC with a sound card and a CD-ROM, right? Somehow I landed that, right? Yeah, I grabbed the opportunity, and I think that's what it's about. It's about grabbing the opportunities as they came along. But, you know, that was luck to a big degree.
Yeah.
And then I got the job, and of course, while I was there, we started to get, you know, do you know anything about this internet thing? And everybody took a look at it, and this was before, I think, just as the image tag had been introduced. So there was no design. We hadn't even worked out table-based design at that point. And it was like, oh, give it to the student. Nobody else wanted to touch it because, you know, because it was boring and shit. So I got given it. And so that lucked out. And then even down to things like, you know, when the iPod came out and it first supported podcasting, and I looked for a podcast on web design, and there wasn't any, and that annoyed me, and I decided to make my own. Again, just life just happens. That's what I mean about surfing. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
You just got to surf these different waves because you don't know where they're going to come from next, you know?
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Well, that's the perfect way to wrap this up. It's find the waves. We're all kind of riding this wave right now, whether you're decades into it or whether you're just getting started. It's like, here we are. Here we are.
In many ways,
what are we going to do with it?
I mean, what a great equalizer, right? Because our decades of experience don't mean that much at the moment, do they?
Yeah.
And so you could be young starting out, and you're not a lot further behind the two of us.
Yep. Yeah. It's like, rather than am I doing this right or whatever? It's I think, like, really cultivating what do I find interesting in this moment? What are the things that when I look out into the world that are missing, and what can I do about it? Right. It feels like a really, really amazing time. We have nothing but, you know, forget sound cards. It's like, geez, oh man, like we have infinite materials to work with now. So it's, I do hope that we're able to sort of collectively kind of steer into kind of the opportunity part of this versus the fear-based or scarcity mindset. And so I really appreciate you talking about your naive optimism. I think but that attitude really matters, though, I think, in moments like this, like, because we have to be able to paint a picture of what could be. Otherwise, we're all just going to be sitting here scared shitless. So it really does take that optimism and that hope and that, like, kind of that looking at the shining thing on the horizon to kind of pull us all along, I think.
But equally, you need the other side of things. You need the people that are worried about the consequences. Otherwise, you know, we end up, you know, all following Elon Musk on whatever wild dream he has, you know, and I go, oh, yeah, that looks shiny. I'll follow that. So, you know, we've all got our part to play, haven't we, really?
Yep. Well, thank you. Thanks so much for taking the time. This has been great. Last question of the whole show. The only other structured part of the show is, what music do you want more people to know about? So
you mentioned this at the beginning before we started recording, and I said I have no musical anything, right? But I do want to reference, because I feel it's relevant to the conversation we've just had, which is that old song, Running Against the Wind, right? Yeah. I'm older now and I'm running against the wind. And it's a song that is basically all about getting kind of pushed down by life and how life overwhelms you. You start off young and enthusiastic, then it pushes you down and it grinds you down, but you come out of the other side of that. That is where I think, bear that in mind. If you're in that pushed down stage, in that crushed stage, you will come out the other end and you'll be stronger for it, and you'll be running against the wind again, you know. Beautiful. So I just love that song. I love the thought of that song.
Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band.
Thank you. I wouldn't have a clue. See, this is why I'm the worst person to answer that question. No idea. I heard it once. I liked it. Great.
Amazing. That's what I'm listening to. Bob Seger for the rest of the day. I love it. I love it. Last thing is, where can people learn about you, find out about you, follow along with what you're up to? And
so everything's on my website. I am old, so I still blog. And there's a newsletter you can sign up to. I push a lot of stuff out on Instagram. So my website's a good place to start. Boagworld.com. BOAG world.com.
And that is the website that I have seared into my memory for as long as I live, is being just getting started, trying to figure out how to get into this. So thank you for your many years of contributing to that website.
Every week since 2005. So if you want to know the naive shit that we believed back in 2005, you can go and find it there.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Paul. Take good care, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.